Welcome back to Consilience Conversations 003, and I find myself back this time with Dr. Matt Roos. Welcome back, Matt.
Thanks. Hello again, Alex. How are you?
I'm doing well, and for this time, just so the listeners know who are on YouTube and also on Anchor, I'm going to be sharing a couple notes that Matt put together for this meeting, just so that you have something to touch base on. And this is if this goes well, which I think it probably will, this might be something that we continue to do into the future. And so, Matt, what was it that we wanted to talk about today? We've talked about confirmation bias. Before now, we've talked about cognitive distortions from the cognitive behavioral therapy world. But, well, what is it we should talk about today?
Well, any of your listeners or viewers at this point looking at the YouTube clip will know, but we've been really hitting this book by John Haidt and Greg Lukianoff quite a bit, and one of the chapters that I think we should talk about is the us versus them chapter, which the title sort of explains it all. But
that doesn't sound like it's very important to our current political situation or to any human situation we would ever find ourselves in.
Totally irrelevant. This is purely for intellectual interest. It really doesn't relate to anything in the real world.
Okay, so then I think that's pretty interesting, because I'm interested in the us versus them distinction. I'm interested in the human perceptual structures that make it necessary for us to see the world in terms of in-groups and out-groups, which we've talked about some, and just how easy it is to develop an in-group and thus an in-group bias, and how if people are in my in-group and I can recognize what my in-groups are, I can recognize my own real biases towards them in life. And so I think you have some research here showing just how, and I think this was in the chapter itself, just how easy it is for a human to develop an in-group A and an in-group bias B. Could you maybe explain some of what this is? Yeah.
Sure. It's pretty elementary, and I don't think it would be challenging for any of your listeners to believe. But so this is sort of what psychologists would call a schema. So that is, this is a framework that people would think of as a schema, where it is sort of almost like an ad lib. It's us versus them. Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? And a shortcut in thinking, in a way, is to just fill in the blanks. And that's sort of your first instinct, and also much more than your first instinct. It can go way beyond that. But yeah, I'm going to cite a couple of experiments or data that are taken right from the book. And the first here is Henry Tajfel. I'm not exactly sure how to say his name, but this Polish psychologist. And he was around during World War II, and his family was, members were mostly murdered by the Nazis at that time. And so a question that he was interested in, and it's sort of amazing that someone would take on this sort of research, the question of sort of, can people be so overwhelmed or so in their nature to follow authority that it will go to the point that they will kill or harm others just because they are inclined to follow that authority figure? So you might think that this is sort of interesting that he would take on this challenge. Almost, will he find, because he might find evidence that would sort of redeem those who had committed these atrocities against his family members. But in any case, he did a series of experiments in which he basically gave people, the subjects of the experiments, some sort of group identity. And that could be in some ways by putting them together and taking out some tasks. We'll talk about this a little bit later in the Robbers Cave experiment, which was by a different experimenter. But more importantly, is what he found is that it could take almost the most slight trivial distinction between members of the groups in order for them to align more closely with their so-called in-group versus their out-group. So in the extreme case, I believe he just flipped a coin, and the subject saw the coin flip and saw that, okay, you're a member of the heads group, or you're a member of the tails group. And then he had a series of different games in which points or money were distributed, and statistically relevant, the subjects favored their in-group, even though they had no idea who these people were, no their affiliation. They still did this. And he did a series of experiments that go beyond that. And the other quick one I'll cite is more in the neuroscience realm, And it's really just a sort of a neural correlation with that behavior. David Eagleman did some experiments using magnetic resonance technology, fMRI, that's functional magnetic resonance imaging. And that's technology that can show sort of where there's increased oxygenated blood flow in different parts of the brain. But what he showed was that subjects that were in this scanner, while they observed, they were observing videos of other people in some sort of comfort or pain. So like a pinprick, perhaps in the fingertip, very relatively mild, but still uncomfortable and unwanted. And he set it up such that these people had in-group versus out-group observations. That is, perhaps if they were a white American male, they saw some white American males, and then they saw women from a foreign country, or, I'm sure there are a wide variety of these things. But the point here is that the neural signals were that are correlated with pain sensing regions, or regions of the brain that are more active when pain is received, were stronger when they were observing those that are in their in-group. So this is really a physiological correlation with this behavioral phenomenon that we see. So that doesn't mean we understand how that comes about, but this empathy, there seems to be an empathy, and it is known that there are correlated brain signals with it.
That's fascinating, because it almost suggests that, because if it only takes a coin toss in order to identify yourself with another person, it seems as if we very clearly are social animals made to identify with others within a group framework. And thus, we even at a neural level develop more empathy with them in an effort to perhaps mimic both their behaviors and beliefs, even to a point of feeling the same pain as them. It's as if part of the evolutionary idea behind this is the closer we can be to each other in action and in thought, the more trust we'll have. Therefore, the stronger a group we will be. But the problem is we need to consider the foundations of the group, which is something that we do not naturally do.
Right, and you said a key word there a few sentences back about an agreement. So, and this was discussed in the book as well. But that you are more likely to agree with others in your group than others in the out group, even if you have sort of no real reason to agree with them. It's just so you can get into sort of a groupthink mentality with those inside your group, and sort of develop an opposition to those that say anything that are outside of your group.
Right. And so something really interesting about this chapter is it made a distinction between two types of identity politics. And it said there's an identity politics with a common enemy identity politics, as well as common goal identity politics, or a different version and they use the example of Dr. King and another person as well. I've forgotten her name at this point. I could open the book, but I'll look at it. They use it.
I don't recall her name as well, but it's common humanity.
Right. And so rather than attempting to narrow one circle in order to exclude other people and to identify sort of a threat against which one directs one's sort of attack capacities or aggressions, the common identity or the common humanity identity politics seek to expand the circle. So something said about Dr. King is that he would say there are no black people, there are no white people, there are Americans, or there are Christian people, or there are humans. And he would go down a level of analysis, right? And try and find that which was common between people in order to bind them together, because he understood that political change requires voters, which means people need to follow you, which means you need to resonate at a common level with a lot of people. And so Haidt seems to
and he did this in a manner that was, sorry to interrupt, to sort of bring them into, expand the group of people that he's including in that he's trying to find commonalities amongst these people to when he says something is unjust, if he expands the group that he's talking to by including them somehow and bringing them into that in-group, then when he describes something as unjust, they are more likely to feel that injustice impacts them, because it's impacting others that are now in their group.
Oh, I love that. So here's a question I have for you. And I know you don't have, a research database sitting right in front of you right now that you're scouring. So maybe we can answer this question
Not right now
as we move forward. But what tends to bind a group together more? Positive reinforcers and reward, or negative ones like a shared burden? Because I have a hypothesis that it's, of course, the shared burden. But I would love to see research on that. What draws people together?
I think it's a great question. I don't have the answers because I don't have that database at my fingertips. My instincts, which could be wrong, is that it's a shared burden. Of course, sometimes the two things can go together. What we haven't mentioned is that part of this, the reason human nature this may exist in human nature may be related to our evolution and our existence as humans in tribal societies, in Africa, in which we formed small groups, and working together in those groups was important for survival. But sometimes conflicts occurred, and so taking an aggressive stance against anyone that was outside of your group could have also been beneficial for survival. And so both those things are sort of common goals, but they're a mix of both positive and negative goals.
And also within the group itself, there might be a requirement for aggression in order to achieve a higher status within the group and a dominance ritual. Say a fight physically, or later on in, say, like the Athenian times, a debate. And so, so that's very interesting. So we've been making some interesting claims and reporting on some findings from the psychology and neuroscience realm, but I think it's only fair for me to sort of stick my neck out with an interesting interpretation from my realm, the classical literature realm. And so do you mind if I sort of explain this odd Glaucus and Diomedes expands the circle claim here from the Iliad, Homer's Iliad? Matt?
Yeah, sorry, I'm losing you here.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So why does it say Diomedes expands the circle, and who are Glaucus and Diomedes? Well, basically there was this war in the 12th or 13th century BCE that was reported on in the 8th century by this oral poet named Homer, whom I teach. And in the middle of this war, this Trojan War, caused by the stealing of Helen from Menelaus of Sparta, there's a big battle going on between an Achaean warrior, that's the side that has been spurned, that has been aggrieved, that has had Helen stolen from them, and this Trojan named Glaucus. And before Diomedes kills Glaucus, he has him tell him who he is. And Glaucus gives this famous line that, "Why ask my name, Diomedes? Just as the leaves on a tree are, so are the generations of men," which does seem to be actually physically true. We grow, we age, we change color, and then we fall. But these are enemies on the battlefield. They are both respective outgroup threats to each other's respective in-group, and also to their desires or known goals to gain more glory. If you die, you don't get much more glory. And so Diomedes is going to kill this guy, but Glaucus eventually says that his grandfather Bellerophon was housed once, or given. Diomedes tells Glaucus that Bellerophon, Glaucus's grandfather, once housed his grandfather Aeneas, and so because of that, they have honored the guest-host relationship to each other, the xenia, sort of like how we still take a bottle of wine over to somebody's house or give gift bags to kids after a gift-giving birthday ceremony. Funny that I would forget that. Man, it's been a long time. But the idea is that these men find common ground in the middle of the war. Glaucus and Diomedes, because their grandfathers were friends, then exchange gifts with each other, indicating that they're friends rather than blows with each other. And so even in ancient literature here, we find a capacity to find a more supervening value or a larger human value that is even more important than the sort of values causing proximate conflict. So both these men want to win glory. Both of them are fighting for their respective countries. Both of them are there to help, but they don't have much at risk. Diomedes is there to get glory. He's from Argos. Argos will be fine. Nobody's attacking it. Glaucus is there supporting Sarpedon from Lycia. Lycia, again, is far away from Troy. It's fine. And so these guys are there to battle, to win. But apparently the friendship of their families is even more important than that. And so I thought that was a good example to start with of people finding common ground and thus expanding their in-group and changing the way they perceive another and how they act towards them.
Yeah, I think this is a great example. I don't know if you want to say more about these other, what I found a little bit interesting in the story, and what I thought was great and amusing about the fact that you selected this is this other part of the story in which they exchange their armor. And Diomedes gives Glaucus his, I guess, bronze armor. It's of modest value, I guess.
It's worth 9 cattle.
Say again?
It's worth 9 cattle.
Right.
Glaucus's golden armor, like you're about to say, is worth 100. So it's over 10 times.
Right.
It's
tenfold. Right. 11-fold. And so that's really just amusing, truly. And so I thought it was just interesting that you picked that. Partially, it was a good example just for the expansion of the circle, and they find commonalities. That is, Diomedes brings Glaucus into his in-group by expanding the circle. But also the fact that in the end, this is for nefarious reasons, if you will, or at least that was my interpretation, having only been introduced to this topic and spent 5 minutes on it earlier today. But in contrast to, the examples of the text that we've been reading by Haidt and Lukianoff, which were generally positive examples, right? Let's bring people into the fold, bringing them into our group, and we'll all be happy together. This is what, deceiving someone, it seemed as though using that tactic.
Well, I have 3 things to say about that are very interesting. The first is, in Book 2 in the Catalog of Ships, Homer does call Glaucus a fool for this for this exchange. But the second thing I would say is that Diomedes and Glaucus give differing value armors to each other, not simply because Diomedes is smarter than Glaucus, or Glaucus is losing his wits, or Diomedes doesn't understand what's happening. I think more the situation, and this is how I teach it to my students, is that Glaucus is grateful to be alive. And Diomedes would have clearly had the upper hand on him. Diomedes, the book before, has just contended with gods, Ares and Aphrodite, and has been given the love of Athena, and he's a stud. He's the scariest guy on the battlefield besides this one other guy called Ajax the Greater right now. So what I often teach the students is, did Glaucus really get a bad deal, or did he get an even better deal than Diomedes? Because Diomedes gave him the gift of life as well. But
could have been a win-win situation.
Right, exactly. And also a mark of the fact that Glaucus met Diomedes and it still didn't go perfectly well with him, because something interesting is that even though Dante didn't read the Iliad, he knew stories about it, and he actually has Diomedes with Ulysses, Odysseus, stuck in hell in the 8th circle with the deceitful counselors. So just to say, there's a little element of that. I
lost you briefly at the end there, Alex, but it sounded like a pretty miserable potential outcome that was averted. So that's great for Glaucus.
Yeah, and so the reason I have Achaeans and Trojans here is that the last thing I'd like to say about building an in-group is that something known about, and this is why we're not calling these people Greeks, is that before the Trojan War, there were various tribes of individuals interesting. Okay. You're showing up now as twice, Matt. So, well, we're twice the fun. But so before the Trojan War happened, there were various sort of tribes and principalities of the Greeks. There was Mycenae, there was Argos, there was Phthia, there was Ithaca, there was Phthia, also where Nestor is from, Sandy Pylos, and various other places like Akinthos, tons of other places. They were not unified, even though they shared the same gods and spoke the same language. it seems to have been the inciting event of them binding together and becoming a collective unity, a nation at some point, was the stealing of Helen from Menelaus. That was something all of them could get behind. The idea of a wife being stolen from a husband who had let this guest into his house, who then trespassed again upon the Xenia, the guest host relationship, was something that was so infuriating to them, something protected by Zeus, that every single man, every lord who heard about that had to go to this war. And in fighting that war, unified under a single king, that is what led to Greece becoming a nation.
Right, and there's our common enemy, identity politics. Is that the analogy?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think it showed them that they valued the same things together, and that these people clearly did not value the same thing.
Right.
And that since this was their top value, those people had to go. They had to pay. Well, and there are chances during the Trojan War for the Trojans to give Helen back, and they don't. Mm-hmm. So it's not just that the Achaeans just put the foot down. They did go try and get Helen back peacefully, though prepared to fight with an army. And the Trojans, they didn't do it. They didn't take the opportunity. So,
and we know how that went in the end.
Yes. Okay. Well, I think we're getting to a pretty good spot here. We probably have time to talk about the Milgram and the Robbers Cave experiment. Okay. Well, could you explain this Stanley Milgram prison experiment?
Yeah, I'll try and make it real quick here. I think this one might be a little bit off base in terms of this sort of us-them paradigm, but we'll just throw it out there and see how it goes. Yeah. So these are some, Stanley Milgram was a psychologist, and back in the 60s or so, I think he did these experiments. And it was basically so he had the subjects. So there's two different types of subjects in this experiment. And one group of subjects are actually not truly subjects. They are sort of actors. They're sort of in on the game with Dr. Milgram. And what Milgram, the real subjects don't know that they're subjects. So by the way, these sort of experiments would not be done today. They are considered sort of unethical for various reasons. But you have to know that you were a subject in the experiment and be told sort of what the possibilities are, the ramifications, and sign off. It's kind of like liability reasons. Anyway, these subjects believed that they were, in a sense, research assistants, so that they're coming in and helping the experimenters, whether that's Dr. Milgram or his other experimental staff, run these experiments. And the experiments, I don't know what the subjects were told about why these experiments are being run, but there's something about like pain thresholds. And so what the subjects, that is the ones who believe that they are helping with conduct the experiments, come in, and it's in a sort of mock prison environment. And somehow the subjects are to be, actually, I think this might be mixed up. So there's a different prison experiment in which there are jailers and there are inmates. Mm-hmm. So, and maybe, is that the one you were thinking of here?
No, I know that one too, and I know that's good. I knew I was going
I'm not even sure. I don't think that's Milgram. Okay, so I'll just move forward. This one is, so they're basically applying an electric shock to the actors that are acting as if they are subjects. And so this is, again, sort of about authority. And will the, so again, it's related a little bit to the Polish psychologist experiments. And the subject is instructed to keep turning up the voltage that's applied for these shocks to people. And these people, they know that this is becoming more and more painful, or they believe it to be. And the acting subjects are screaming in pain and acting profusely. And I think they actually might have even like recorded some screaming and things like that they could play.
Yes.
They're not exactly across from each other. They're presumably in different rooms. Anyway, the point of this is that in many cases, something like, we'll just say, I think they did a meta survey, something like 30 to 60% of the subjects that were believed that they were research assistants would take the voltages so high that they were at the level that they could cause death. And I'm assuming that they were informed that this was sort of like the death level. And people would do it anyway because they were told to do it. And so it's really shocking. And there are some, this is again kind of related to the possibility of like, were Nazis just doing, or some of them doing things because they were told to do it. And there are many criticisms of that interpretation. So it's a fascinating experiment in and of itself, somewhat interesting in sort of its relationships to things like World War II and Nazism, although those links are weak. But perhaps the question that is pertinent here is, did these subjects who tortured effectively these other people, or believed that they were torturing them, did they do that because they felt like they were in an in-group? Were they with the experimenters? Were they part of the experimenters? And all the other subjects who they believed to be experimental subjects, volunteers, were nonetheless part of this outgroup, and therefore they were willing to subject them to pain.
Right. That's exactly my hypothesis. That's why I wanted to consider this, because I know that that's not traditionally what people look for in this. But what I think is operating here is that when you identify with the research group, you believe sort of inherently, without laying it out like this probably, that the research to your own in-group is worth even the sacrifice of somebody from an out-group. And you think about some of the experiments the Nazis were doing, and in particular that the Japanese were doing during World War II, Unit 731, and how inhuman it was. And that makes me think that the power of the in-group, out-group distinction is that if taken to its extreme, which that experiment shows a fairly easy capacity to do, you will do anything for your in-group and do anything to or against your out-group. And that's sort of a fundamental way of humans seeing the world. And so it's interesting to see just how capable you are if that distinction is made in any way.
This could be, and so yeah, that's interesting, and that's not what I was thinking about as your connection with Nazi Germany, but it is an interesting and fascinating one. One of the criticisms, I'll just quickly put it out there, that people have against connecting the Milgram's experiment to the kind of experiments you're talking about, or Nazi Germany extermination of the Jewish people, as well as experiments like you're talking about, horrendous experiments on individuals, is that in the Milgram experiments, they still they were told the subjects that were helping assist in these experiments, in their mind, were told that there would be no permanent damage to the subjects that they were shocking. Now, that doesn't mean they didn't believe that they were really being inflicted with pain. However, that is still different than the experiments, the real experiments that you're referring to, in which case those experiments, the point here is, one might take this as an excuse to say, oh, they were just following orders, and they were just, how could they not do these experiments? It was just human nature to act like this because you're part of this in-group. So we still don't know that, but
I'm not so much giving it as an excuse from human nature as suggesting that this seems to be the mechanism by which people do commit atrocity, and that it's fairly easy to turn the switch so that you can activate these behaviors.
Right. I totally agree. Just wanted to highlight the fact that that's, it's not an excuse.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Because I'm trying to say the opposite, that it's actually because of how easy this machinery activates and the range of behavior it permits that you need to be super on guard and aware of your thinking and your feeling in a situation. Because, the second it's us and them, well, that's what leads seemingly to the greatest atrocities ever or possible.
And again, the common enemy theme, common enemy identity politics, that where what's our common, Hitler somehow he did this amazing con job of convincing everybody that the Jews were the common enemy. And they went for it. It fell into their schema.
Yeah, well, and Well, I think we're making some good great ground here. And so how about we end with the Robbers Cave experiment, which I think more directly ties to our theme. I wanted to try and make that argument with, let's put a big asterisk next to the Stanley Milgram one. But that's something I do want to dig into a little because, I want to understand human nature better, and that's why I learned from you. So,
Well, let's move forward. If I can talk about the Robbers Cave one. I don't know a lot about it. If you think you know about as much as I do, then go for it.
No. Please do. Okay. You're the scientist here.
Yeah. Well, that doesn't mean I only know a little bit about it. You're the one that brought it up. But anyway,
that's right. I am the one that brought it up, and I did have
right. So I'll give you credit for calling it out. But the Robbers Cave, it's not really about a cave. It's just about. It's sort of a Boy Scout experiment. And I don't remember what the year was for this, but I'm going to guess it was also, 50 years ago or more. I don't know. And the researchers effectively took sort of like 2 Boy Scout troops out into the woods, except they weren't Boy Scout troops. They were random 12-year-old boys, not random, but they were chosen to be as 2 different groups that were sort of similar in their collective makeup. 12-year-old boys with sort of middle class or low middle class upbringing, and a lot of similarities. So, and they brought them out to sort of a woodsy or this area called Robbers Cave. So it's just outdoor fun and exploration. And they bring them out there, and they went through sort of 3 stages. And each of these stages was probably several days long. And in the first stage, the 2 groups didn't really even know each other existed. They just thought it was kind of like summer camp. And so here we get on the bus. I don't know any of these other boys. And they go out there and they, have activities that they do together. And some of those activities could be sort of mundane, things like playing sports, or some of them, I believe, were sort of particularly driven to try and increase engagement and bonding, sort of, as you mentioned, the common goals that they would have to pursue. And then somehow the researchers allowed them to sort of fed them information or leaked information that they found out there was another group of boys. And even having not met any of them or known any of the boys, they already started to exhibit. This is sort of stage 2. The us-them is already forming. They don't even, it's almost like there was no them, but us has formed. And therefore, there's automatically anybody that's not us is them. And so just hearing about this existence of other boys got them sometimes a little bit riled up, and they said, we want to, play them in the game of baseball. They want to compete. And so eventually they go through this next stage of the experiment, and the boys come together and they interact, and they sort of allow them to do this freely, but with games and sports involved. And, I can't speak to the details, but they're sort of like acrimonious interactions, and they are, one team wants to burn the other one's flag and vice versa. And they even come up with these flags and these names for their teams themselves. The researchers did not push this. This is just what I guess all 12-year-old boys back then, and probably still today, would do. So it's not really surprising, I suppose, given it, fits right in the theme that we're talking about. And so there was, animosity really between the groups, even before they had met.
Well, I have two questions based on
sure.
that. Would you then say, and I want to make sure to think the second question in before you answer this one, because I think you're going to want to answer it fast, is that do you think that then in the development of an identity, whether as a person or a group, and I can pull out some Piaget for next time to maybe add some beef to this comment, that a necessary form, so say the first stage of developing an identity is developing an us, a self-definition, an identity itself. And that the next step is identifying all that which is not you. And that becomes the them. And there's sort of an antagonism between us and them, or you and them. And that ultimately part of being an individual is learning to integrate more of that them, whether it be information or people, into one's group. And the second sort of question based on that one, if it's right-minded at all, would be, would that suggest that those people currently playing, the second question is, does that suggest that the us-them stage is a necessary secondary part of the the production of a larger us group. It's us, then it's us, them, then it's a larger us. And would that suggest that those who are currently playing common enemy identity politics are in stage 2 and need, if they want to develop, more strength or power or collective unity, they need to move to that stage 3 and find common ground?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, for the first part, this is sort of speculation, but it seems like maybe us and them, if once you start to form us, maybe them is just the other side of a coin, of the the other side of the coin. There is no, even if you're in a void, even though to your knowledge, there's no one else in existence, you still somehow have this sort of innate them, that is anybody that is not us, even if you are not sort of consciously thinking of that not us group. And to this, I guess it's related to that slightly is, like anything, this is something that you will, people are, of course, are going to develop over time as humans, as individuals, and probably become, we'd hope all of us become more aware of our tendencies to do this over time, and are more likely to not automatically exclude or consider someone who's not in our in-group as automatically in the out-group. That may be easier said than done, but I think there's, sort of just a level of maturity or growth that every individual goes through. And they may, especially, of course, if they've heard this before, they've been made aware that this is sort of a manner in which humans behave. Maybe they can counter that.
That would be a really interesting hypothesis to test too. Manners by which humans develop initial in-group preference for people, identifiers for in-group, and what are the strongest identifiers, and then developing based on that cognitive strategies for turning people into in-group from out-group if you initially naturally identify them, as opposed to, like, say you're an Eagles fan and a Falcons fan is
right.
You're
a football fan, and so maybe you hate hockey fans.
Right. Precisely. There are those seemingly natural antagonisms, right? Like, you're a soccer player, probably not a big fan of baseball or something like that.
It can also go a little bit with the again, we can phrase it both in the common enemy identity and the common humanity identity. And I believe in the book we're reading, Coddling the American Mind, I think they even mentioned that, or use a quote from someone else that is, my brother's my enemy. My cousin is the enemy of my brother and I. I forget the next level, my neighbor is the enemy of my cousin, my brother and I. And so it can go on and on.
Like, I against my brother, I and my brother against my cousins, I and my brother and my cousins against, like, the world or the tribe or the nation.
Yes.
I thought it was really interesting because I was like, then who do you trust? And apparently the idea is no one.
What we need is sort of an asteroid to come and threaten us all. So we'll all have to come together and fight it.
The asteroid is just as likely to come from within with us, with nuclear weapons and, the sorts of ingenious diabolical
things of climate change and nuclear weapons and all sorts of just world strife. Those are things that World War II, in a way, brought a lot of country and people together. Unfortunately, it's such a tragedy in order for that to happen.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because that's something I think we wanted to talk about for next time, or the time after, building good habits, and also the necessity of putting problems in front of minds in order to develop them in an anti-fragile and robust way. And so I'm not suggesting.
I don't know if you might want to explain anti-fragile to anyone that's listening. I don't recall whether you've brought that up before in this series, or if that's
Okay, well, this is personally interesting to me as a developer of minds, as an educator. And I think it's relevant to this podcast because it has something to do with the nature of the brain and the brain-mind relationship. And so basically, antifragility is a concept that is used by Haidt and was come up with by Nassim Taleb, who wrote a book called Antifragile, and earlier a book called Black Swan. And so he identifies systems within nature which require stressors in order to become stronger, and that's how they secure their position within the world. In particular, one of the systems we have in our bodies is the immune system, which until recently we didn't have a ton of peanut allergies, but now we have more of them because apparently peanuts are a little bit poisonous. And what we do is you give peanuts to a young human, like a baby level human, whenever they can start eating food or peanut product anyway. And they their immune system comes into contact with it and develops a tolerance. There's an inoculation. And so that's why most people can eat peanut butter. But more people can't eat peanuts these days because their parents are afraid of giving them peanuts because they're afraid that they're allergic, when in reality they become allergic when they're not exposed to the inoculating influence of the peanuts itself. So in treating the immune system as if it is fragile, you actually make it more fragile. It's sort of a Freudian nightmare of, the mom working to keep the son weak so that he'll be there forever with her.
And another one, that's also related to, we can think of it even in, as adults. If you don't get enough exercise, you will atrophy or decay away. Muscular exercise or skeletal exercise. And too much, of course, is too much, but you have to find enough exercise to keep your body healthy.
Yeah, and I'd say probably for 99% of people, too much is not a problem. And I work out every day, and even I could do more. And I'd say, I don't, it's funny how we do kind of think in extremes, right? Like often when I hear people say they want to go and do a fitness program, they say like, well, I don't want to get too bulky, or I don't want to lose too much weight. It's like, listen, that's not a problem. Get to the middle before you'll get to the middle.
Yeah.
Before you get to the
You're thinking way too far ahead here.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so I think we have a couple topics set up for next time. We're either going to go ahead. We read another article this time about the relationship between the limbic system and the basal ganglia by a very, very wonderful thinker, Gray. And that was a very tough read for me. So I'll be happy to have your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, anytime you start getting into the complexities of subcortical neural systems, basal ganglia, in particular, it is a challenge. And there are a lot of sort of different nuclei, that is clusters of neurons connected in very complicated ways. There are a large number of neurotransmitters and different types of receptors. Just because you have, I'll give giving our listeners a preview, but you have dopamine, okay, but the dopamine doesn't, different neurons respond differently to dopamine depending on the type of receptors on the neuron. So it's amazingly complex. And the article you read, or that we've looked at, is, I believe, from 95.
Wow.
And so we could look at much newer, more recent information. And I think you get a little bit more clarity if you look at things, we'll say, from 20 years. 20 years has taught us a lot, but it's still murky. It's a challenge.
Well, I'm looking forward to getting into that. That's fascinating because, I would like to clean up my thinking about that. And just hearing the idea about the basal ganglia, about different cells responding differently to dopamine. That's pretty cool stuff. And strap in, listeners. And also we're sort of planning to go through an article that was released a few years ago by The Atlantic, talking about what got me fired up about it is it talks about education practice, and it, like so many things, lays sort of a problem at the feet of educators, which is actually a problem which can't be solved. And so something personally interesting to me is talking about issues in sort of like intelligence and IQ, as well as issues of sort of the strength and durability of the young human mind, as opposed to the perception of it as fragile and requiring safety, because it's looking like a lot of research is coming out that's putting some of these issues to bed, and certainly putting contemporary theories and practices about them to bed. And, I think an educator needs to speak up, possibly with a neuroscientist, making sure that he's saying the right stuff. And that's the person I want to be.
This sounds great, Alex. I'd like to highlight that although the researchers might put it to bed, that doesn't mean the practitioners and those of us and the rest of society will put it to bed.
Sure. I think this is a transition.
Always worth talking about.
Yeah, always worth talking about. Well, at least things need to be said first sometimes. Sometimes a problem needs to be identified before it can be solved, or all the time. And so maybe other people will identify the same problems we have, or agree that we have identified a real problem, rather than just had measurement error or something like that.
Let's hope so.
Yeah. All right. Well, Matt, or Dr. Roos, another great conversation. I can't wait for the next one.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Schmid. Had a great time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.